It took me a little while to get the legal research done. It's the upside of being a lawyer. I can dive into the USCA and all the court cases for you. And I discovered a hitch on the president's desire to do a new census that has not come up in the conversations in the last 24 hours. So let me step back and reset for you here now. The President of the United States says he wants to do a new census, and he wants that census to exclude illegal immigrants, which I think he's got a plausible argument for that. Now, to be clear here, just so you understand, the rule says you have to, for purposes of the census under the Constitution, you've got to count the whole number of persons in each state. Now, that doesn't say legal or illegal. The pattern and practice has always been count residents of states. And it doesn't matter whether they're legal or illegal. And again, I'm just explaining this one to you. Hold your fire at me. Let me just explain it to you so you at least understand the issue. The census is not just about reapportionment of the Constitution. You know, I talk about the Federalist Papers class at Hillsdale College. If you took it, you learn from the Federalist Papers that our founders wanted a real sense of the evolution of the population of the country. How many immigrants, how many native-born people, all of that. And our government uses the census data to apportion not just Congress, but federal aid to states. So whether you like it or not, it is current policy in the United States that if there's an illegal alien family residing in your state, that illegal alien family's children get to go to your public schools. You may not like it. That's different from what the law and policy are. And the federal court precedent and the legal precedent, the law, the regulations, as applied in the states, an illegal alien's family that is living in the United States, their children can go to public school. So that's one of the reasons we count everybody, not just citizens, because when you're apportioning aid to states, for example, education, you got to know how many people are in the schools in the states, how many families there are, so that when the government divides up the money that it gives to states for education, it divides them up based on population, not of citizens, but of the people who are living there who take advantage of social services. Now, again, you can say only citizens should be allowed to take advantage of social services, but that's not the way it works. At least understand why the census is done. It has way more to do than just apportionment for Congress. Now, back in 2020, the president, Donald Trump at the time, ordered Wilbur Ross, then the Secretary of Commerce, to exclude illegal aliens from the census, and a lawsuit was filed. And the president went through two tracks. One was to tell Wilbur Ross to exclude illegal aliens from the census, and the other was to insert a question into the census that asked about citizenship. There's a fatal flaw in how President Trump's first term in office handled this. Remember the illegal immigrant case? I forget now the name of it, from way back when Bill Clinton was president. Bill Clinton settled a case out in California about the treatment of illegal aliens. And it has bound the federal government in their handling of illegal aliens ever since, how they are processed in and out of the country, how they're allowed to be held or not. I forget now the name of the case. Y'all know what I'm talking about, I think. That essentially Bill Clinton entered into a consent decree in a case out of San Francisco back in the early 90s, and it has bound every president since in their treatment of illegal aliens. Well, here's the problem for Donald Trump. Donald Trump got sued in 2020 over this insistence that the census exclude illegal aliens. And Donald Trump got a negative ruling from a 3-judge panel in San Francisco. Yesterday I said it was D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. It wasn't. It was a district court 3-judge panel in California. But here's a problem. Donald Trump did not settle the case by the time he left office. Guess who settled the case? Joe Biden. How did Joe Biden settle the case? Entered a consent decree and agreed that in the future, presidents would not exclude illegal aliens from being counted in the census. So you've got a federal government consent decree where the federal government, the president of the United States, bound the government to ask for that. Now, the president can get this changed very easily through Congress, but there's a problem. You see, the president is not actually in charge of the census. So Donald Trump can order the Commerce Secretary, and by the way, it takes upwards of $15 billion to conduct a census. Donald Trump can order the Commerce Secretary to do a census, but the president is not in charge of the census. The census is in Article 1, Section 2, Clause 2, or Clause 3, rather, of the U.S. Constitution that gives Congress, not the president, the power to conduct a census as Congress shall by law direct. So the Congress has written a law, 13 U.S.C., that's United States Code annotated, USCA, 13 USCA 141. That law governs the conduct of the census. It's not what the president says. It's not what the president wants. It's what Congress wants. And what Congress does is it authorizes and conducts what is called a decennial census. That is in every year that begins with a zero. Ends with a zero, not begins. Every year that ends with a zero. 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010, 2020, 2030. Every 10 years, when we get to a year that ends with a zero, Congress says a census shall be taken. It shall be done by the Commerce Department, and it shall begin in April of that year, and it must be concluded by September of that year, and all the data transmitted by the end of the year to the states. And it lays out some procedures. 3 years before the census is conducted, the Commerce Secretary must transmit to Congress the topics the Commerce Secretary wants included in the census. 2 years before the census is taken, the specific questions based on those topics must be given to Congress. And 1 year before the census is taken, the Commerce Secretary must outline the plan on how it's going to be taken, a physical head count of all the people of the nation. It can't be a statistical sampling. It's got to be a physical head count according to the Constitution. The Democrats for years wanted to do statistical sampling, and the Supreme Court said, no, the Constitution actually says you got to do a head count of the people. That means a physical knock on doors, see where people are, and count them. It is the greatest, most accurate sampling of population of any country on planet Earth, and has been since 1795 when we conducted a brief one, and then 1800 when we conducted the first full decennial census. It is a very accurate count, and it tracks the population over time. So now here's the thing for the president. The president wants to do a new census, and the law says the decennial census must be done every 10 years in a year ending in zero. However, 13 USCA 141 says you can do a mid-decade census in years that end in 5. So in 1985, in 1995, in 2005, in 2025, you can do a mid-decade census according to the law. There's a catch. Topics must be submitted 3 years in advance. Questions must be submitted 2 years in advance. The plan to carry out the census must be sent to Congress 1 year in advance. And it must be started in April of the year that ends in 5. We're now in August. So the mid-decade census should have begun in April with questions that were submitted to Congress 2 years ago. It's not a power of the president to do the census. So all of this is to say that the president can attempt to do a census, but where's he going to get the money from? Takes $15 to $20 billion to do a census. Congress hasn't approved money. Maybe they can do it in reconciliation, but they're going to have to find stuff to cut. What do they cut to fund it? Also, there's another catch. Let me just read for you the actual language from the statute. It's not convoluted legalese. This is very easy to understand. Remember, the mid-decade census is the census that Congress says can be done in a year that ends in 5, which would be this year. But it's supposed to begin in April. It has to be ended by September. Here's what the actual law says. Information obtained in any mid-decade census shall not be used for apportionment of representatives in Congress among the several states, nor shall such information be used in prescribing constitutional districts. The president has a real valid reason to want to know how many citizens are in the United States. He does. You can't deny that. The president has legitimate reasons for wanting to know. And frankly, we should know not just how many people are in the country, but how many of those people are actually American citizens. You can bellyache about that all you want, but I think it's a very fair point that this is data that we as a nation should have, because the Constitution's very clear: in federal elections, only citizens of the United States can vote. How many of those people are there? We can get a good measure based on how many people vote versus the number of citizens. What are we missing or not? There's also another problem. The 2020 census, whether you want to believe it or not, was actually a deeply flawed census, in large part because of COVID. And when the Biden administration took it over, there does appear to have been problems in processing the data. This is Brad Todd on CNN talking about the problems.
One of the big things is it helps decide congressional maps.
Right.
Does this have everything to do with redistricting?
Well, it does. In fact, we know the 2020 census, the errors were almost always to the detriment of red states. Blue states like Rhode Island.
Do we know that?
We do know that. The Census Bureau's own audit of its work has proven that. Blue states like Rhode Island were overcounted. Rhode Island then didn't lose a seat. Red states like Alabama were undercounted. Listen, this is just a fact. It wasn't all red-blue, but it was disproportionately red-blue.
He's right, by the way. He's right. The census's own data showed that. Now, you should understand who processed the data. That would be Donald Trump's Census Department. This wasn't a Democrat, maybe it was a deep state conspiracy, but it was Donald Trump's own Commerce Department that oversaw the processing of the census data. When Joe Biden got the census data in 2021 and it was being transmitted to the states, it was the Biden administration that actually acknowledged the census data from 2020 undercounted the red states. So what did Joe Biden do about it? Well, he did not choose to do a mid-decade census. Instead, what Joe Biden did was he bound future presidents to the requirement to count illegal aliens in the census. That's the problem here. All of this is to say the census issue is a little bit of a distraction because the president's going to be held up in court because of what Joe Biden agreed future presidents would do until changed. It hasn't been changed by an act of Congress, so Donald Trump is bound by the decision of the consent decree that Joe Biden did. Whether you like it or not, that's the way the law works. Likewise, the Congress, not the president, is in charge of the census. The Congress says you can do a mid-decade census, but it's got to begin in April. Joe Biden decided not to do a mid-decade census, so he intentionally, willfully cut the legs out from under Donald Trump. If Donald Trump wants to do a census, one, I don't know where he gets the money from. We're $39 trillion in debt. He wants to spend up to $20 billion doing a new census. Two, he's bound by court precedent and a legal decision that the prior president entered into that he's got to count illegal aliens. And three, if you want to do an actual governmental census, it can't be done for reapportioning. It can't be done for dividing up districts. It can't be done for redistricting. It can't be done for any of those purposes. By law, it's expressly prohibited that data from being new. So I'm not exactly sure what the point is other than it's a distraction from other issues. It's a lot of money to be spent. I think he's got a legitimate concern for wanting to know the number of citizens, but the law matters still, and the Constitution matters still, and the President of the United States is not actually in charge of the census, and I assume he doesn't know that. And Pam Bondi might not know it to tell him that. The Commerce Secretary might not know it and to tell him that. But it seems like there are plenty of hills to die on and not on wasting time on a census that the Congress says can't be called.